Hello, my friends, Evolutionary Energy Arts family.
And here we are, we're back.
And we have a special guest with us. We have David DuByne, Adapt 2030. He is the ageless one, is what I was going to say.
I'm not ageless. I have a body with me that is aging, but hopefully more in the light as we move through the 21st, through these massive changes of energy that are going to be around the end of the year. I'm so glad that we were having a conversation before this about these same changes, because I think we all feel it, something changing, and why the way the world's changing is why it's changing, because of these changes that are coming, if that makes sense to anybody out there.
I like it.
Yeah, it sure does.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we could feel it. It's just the energy's getting so intense. We were talking about feeling the energy, feeling the changes, and you brought up, such a great point about the fact that we're switching from earth to air.
And that was the last time that happened. The change of the sign like this was 1226 AD. For those of you out there, you'd realize that. The last time there was a major shift from one of the elements to the next element was in 1226 AD. So go back and look what happened then. Magna Carta occurred around that time, and you got to think that was a massive change.
Yeah, sure.
Give you everybody a right of being a human on this planet is what Magna Carta basically was. Now that's a gargantuan shift. So if the last shift ushered in that much change on how the world operated, I'm wondering what this shift is also going to bring in. Something obviously huge, and that's why governments are posturing to try to control the citizenry even more than I think they could have done back then in 1200 AD.
Well, I think it's an extremely exciting time, especially for people who do study a little bit of astrology. You don't need to be really big into it. You can just know a little bit to understand that these shifting energies are going to have a huge impact. Like you said, that's, I think it's 700 or 800 years between the last time this happened and now. And I do believe the powers that be completely understand what's happening, and that's why there's so much control being ushered in so fast.
And if you think of gears on the watch for a second here, Cindy, like the way that it's rolling through, not only is the change of the energy signs from going from the earth to the air, but at the same time overlapping on that is heading right into the intensification of the grand solar minimum. So I'm wondering, just those two cogs alone of how cycles work inside our solar system and, greater arm of the galaxy, how many times prior would we have to go back? Because if it's a 400-year cycle in the grand solar minimum, and it's a 700-year cycle with the changing of the elements, then 4 does not divide by 7. So we'd have to go 7 times what equals what, and then 4 times what equals. Because if nine of the cycles of 400, that's still 36. But the 7 times 5 is 35, 3,500 years, so they're still off by 100 years. So how far back do we have to go back before they dovetail and overlap just like they are now? Like 8,500 years ago, something like, we're talking vast cycles, and then we're moving into a different sign inside the precession of the equinoxes as well, and then add that on top. You might be going back 100,000 years to find a lineup of all these cycles overlapping right now. Don't think about just one cycle, everybody out there. It's other cycles overlapping on top of other cycles on top of other cycles that are even more 1,000-year cycles, on top of 700-year cycles, on top of 400-year cycles. And then how long back in history do we have to go to find that same interaction with all the elements and the planets and the energies?
Yeah, that's fascinating to contemplate. There's so many thoughts going through my head when you're saying that. And we know about the big cycles, and we've pointed out that roughly 12,000 year cycle, roughly half of a precession. This could be way bigger than even that. I mean, we might be talking bigger change than, anything we've seen in who knows how long.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
This is huge. This is huge, and we could feel it. I think everybody can feel it. And the powers that be can definitely feel it. And that's why they're moving so damn fast, because, they certainly do enjoy and love their control. But if natural forces are to give sway and to, be able to do what they're intended to do, whether you believe that's coming from God or not, source, prime creator, whatever word you want to use, there's some grand scheme going on at this time that's going to trigger just an amazing evolutionary leap in consciousness.
Well, it is. And all of our abilities are getting stronger. We're all getting more psychic. We are all getting more empathic. We are all getting more sensitive. And this is something that a lot of people don't really understand what is happening to me, what is happening to my body, what is happening to my brain. And we are evolving. And I really feel that this is going to be something that it's going to be huge and it's going to be beautiful. And I really wish that they weren't so, I wish they weren't so repressive right now, because otherwise things could be completely changed. But right now they have an agenda.
Yeah, they certainly do. And keeping that fear stoked. So when people are experiencing these changes, they might think it's the fear from the news that they're seeing with the undisputed X, Y, and Z around the planet, and new systems of control, whether it be whatever kind of government system, or whether it be something on the you have one, I have one, on the socialist thing, or like you're going to take my house, you're going to take my kids, you're going to not let me have my job. There's just so many things going on the fear base right now. If you're in the old system thinking that they're going to try to hold on to the old world and drag it through to the new world, if you can keep somebody spun in that state right there, they might not know that this changes right now, making their mind feel and look at things differently. They might think it's the news feed that's doing it to them, when in reality it's all these changes, but the narrative that the news is building is putting that into their head to question really what's causing the change in their thoughts, their ideas, maybe their fear, maybe their complete embracing of it, whatever it is. But the way everything's structured right now, it's to make it the illusion that it's not mystical changes or energy changes. It is a change of how the world's changing. It's a huge difference, but I think they framed it and kind of gaslit everybody that if you're feeling stress right now, or you're feeling angst or anxiety and you don't know how to handle it, that's because there's all this chaos in the world. But perhaps it's all these energies blowing through that are removing old blocks that people are trying to cope with themselves, but they're misinterpreting it as something they saw on the news, or the way the world is with the mask and the keeping people apart. And I think you're right that people aren't maybe able to understand exactly what's happening with all these changes, and they're looking at it from a different direction than actually what the causation is.
Exactly. 2020 has been the most unusual year, I think, in probably most people's lives. I think that's kind of safe to say. And I think that if we didn't have all the influences of the power structure, that it would have been a year of amazing change that would have been just so positive and so enlightening. It's that order that's in place that wants to create that new order of even more control through division. That's causing the chaos. In so many cases, even with the weather phenomenon, I think there would be changes. We would see some natural increases in things, but I think, again, the technology is there to augment everything, and we just can't trust data. We were just talking before we started this session about where's all the data on the magnetic pole reversal? Yeah, and because I'm not finding anything, and you basically confirmed what I was thinking.
Yeah, and I want to encourage anybody out there to go look beyond the world magnetic model, which is pretty much the easiest one to find. If you do a search engine search, that'll pop up first, the world magnetic model. But start to jump out on some of the satellite data sets like SWARM and the European Space Agencies. They have monitoring stations across both polar regions, especially up in Norway and those more Scandinavian countries. And you come around, Russia has a few. There's some up in Alaska. But to try to find where these are and get their data from them online, very difficult. Some people are setting up their own networks out there now and having people send in their cards after they're full and kind of have a replacement system of people sending out magnetometers to individual citizens in different parts of the planet, and then setting up their own networks outside of governmental, I guess, measurements, because it's just the information is not forthcoming. And if this was, and it is, I do believe, another part of it, these changes electrically, electromagnetically, are all feeding into this great energetic change, because if the poles are obviously going to be magnetically in different places, that would explain why thousands of birds have been slamming into these buildings in Philadelphia and New York City and whatnot, and why there's so many more strandings and things out of place. Although that's been going on for, at least 10, 12 years now, to the point where the shock factor is worn off the news when 1,000 dolphins strand themselves. Like, it used to be a world headline where people would fly in from around the world to try to, put towels over these things and keep them wet. And now you go, 1,000, oh, wasn't there one with 3,000 that stranded? It's kind of lost its shock value, because it's gotten such to the uber numbers of things getting in the wrong place at the wrong time and magnetically completely, I should say, off kilter. So you could expect more of that as well. And then how we operate in the hemispheres of our brain magnetically, I mean, if that's shifting, then all these other external shifts are coming on with the changes of the age here. And magnetically, I mean, that's like a trifecta of change that would affect us as a species.
Yeah, as we are transitioning deeper into Dwapara Yuga, leaving the Kali Yuga, it's a beautiful thing. It's a good thing, because we've been in darkness, and we could view it from the traditional Vedic point of view. I was sharing before, they say roughly in the Kali Yuga, the most a human could live is 100 years, and the Dwapara goes up to 1,000, and then we get into, and these are also related as the Dark Age, the Iron Age, the Iron Age, the Bronze Age, the Silver, and the Golden. So when we get up into the Silver Age, then it's 10,000, and then in the Golden Age, it's 100,000. And we have all these legends, whether it's biblical and it's Methuselah, 969 years, or the Sumerian Kings list, with people actually ruling for like 10, 20, 30,000 years. And of course, the mainstream and scientists will say, and the historians will say, that's just fable. That's just stories. That's just, just trying to say how grand these rulers were and inflate their egos and everything. But is there some truth in it when you get down to it?
Well, I definitely feel there's a lot of truth in it. So many things have been covered up. Our history changes year by year by year. If you were to get a school textbook and just go even 5 years back, or science, they've had to rewrite these books, and they're continuing to rewrite them. I feel like it's a very slow drip disclosure. Eventually, they're going to have to come out with all the information, and it's like a frog in boiling water. It's a very slow disclosure, but it's happening.
Well, they've indoctrinated everybody that we're in this linear timeline of progression and evolution of science and art and whatnot. So this explains why places like Baalbek, where there are these multi-thousand-ton blocks that we couldn't even lift today, and some of these really grand building structures with all these megalithic blocks. But if you're talking about a race of people who are living to be 1,000 or 5,000, 10,000 years old that had much larger bodies than ourselves, and literally unlimited what they could do with their power at that time, energetically, I think that's why we're finding, and there's so many of these structures around the planet. And I bet, if we took 400 feet off the ocean level, we'd find even larger cities than what we know of the grandest of cities right now that are archaeological ruins and archaeological sites. I mean, you can't have this much grand, large building of multi-100-ton blocks or 1,000-ton blocks that we can barely lift. But that seemed to be the standard across the planet. And it's all been whooshed away like, oh, they were way better builders than we are now. It just doesn't make sense. Even the cathedrals of Europe, we can't even replicate them. When there's a fire in there, we can't even rebuild those to the stature that they were before the fire, because we don't have the technology to do it such as it was done back then, even supposedly 500 years ago. And a lot of things are out of place in history. Half of the timeline doesn't even make sense when you look at it, but it does on the Yuga cycle. But how much control would you lose over the human race if you told them things were in cycles, not linear?
Well, exactly, and that's the same thing with the religious control. You know, you have to make people think that they only have one life, and then they get judged by a god. But if you know that, well, yeah, I'm in this life now. I've lived hundreds of times before, and I probably will live hundreds or thousands of times again. Boy, that changes everything. That takes a lot of control away from them.
It sure does. It takes probably too much control, and I feel that's why they're coming in with all of these fear tactics and all of these new control methods, because they realize, if human beings, if we become more psychic like I feel we are, people are going to start seeing through all the BS, and they're going to start understanding, which is going to create a whole new world, which is kind of exciting and kind of scary.
It is, and I'm gonna throw a little off subject here. Like, in my next incarnation, I hope I know you both again too this time around, and next time, and the next time.
Aw, thank you. We appreciate it, and we got to get together in person too.
Definitely.
As long as we're still allowed to travel over state lines.
Right.
And do that, yeah.
You brought up.
So imagine people that, well, see, the discombobulated, I should say the separated religions around the planet. You go over to India and you were talking about the Vedas, and they understood the cycles. But then over in the Western religions, it's pure about one time and you're done. So and then there's always been that don't mix with that religion, don't marry that person in that religion. Oh, the religions need to stay separate. Don't you dare mix between. And there's been this control device to even, I should say, slice up the knowledge that was left of the old ways and deposit it in certain areas that are not supposed to mix with any other area. Because even up until recently, inter-religious marriages were a absolute burn you at the stake no. Until what? How many years ago do you think that was acceptable? What, 50 years, 100 years? Not very recently. You're talking about, at least a couple 100,000 years of human history here, and then just the last 100 years we're allowed to intermarry between religious beliefs. That's crazy. Why did they keep it separated for so long? What was so terrifying about people learning about others' religions?
Exactly. I mean, we've even seen the conflict between Catholicism and Protestantism as well in the same basic religion. It's all about control, and that's why I keep doing videos talking about where our version of Christianity comes from, because it comes out of Constantine, who was a Roman emperor, and Christianity was spreading by wildfire, but it was so diverse. There were so many different sects practicing in different ways. And so, he was very smart. And he just, if you can't beat them, join them, but then make a version that's full of control. And, the power structure went into the Catholic Church. And, we could see if we look through his history, which, as we know, it's his story, the church wielded a lot of power and influence. And there were a lot of atrocities done. And it was to instill this system upon us. As we know, there was over 200 gospels in circulation, and then we got 4. And if you go and look at the most complete gospel of John that we have, which dates from around 300 AD, there's revisions in it left and right. There's words jotted out, new words put in, so there's been a revision of history that is just so obvious, and it's even in our religions too.
Can I ask you, you might know a little bit more about the Gospel of Thomas and the Nag Hammadi scrolls. I know you do. I've read a little bit about it and, delved into it a sliver, but you seem to be an expert on this. So talking about the revisions as well as these Gospels have been taken out, the Book of Enoch, that's another whole part and something to talk about. But I am so fascinated by these Nag Hammadi revisions in the Gospel of Thomas. You think you could, talk about this just for a minute? Because I really want to learn from you right now.
Oh, I appreciate it. There's a whole different philosophy there when you start looking at the Gnostic texts, because again, it's the Gnostic way of doing things is looking within. That's really what it breaks down to. It's again a going within. It's gnosis, so it's that personal experience that you have that changes you. It's that knowing that comes from a personal experience and not any sort of indoctrination. Has nothing to do with, getting baptized in a certain way, making a certain statement, and then making sure that you go to church every Sunday and tithe 10%, because it was a totally different philosophy. And the thing that's beautiful is if we take out that fundamentalist mindset, we can start to really see that all the world's religions are talking about the same thing. And, again, it's right in the Bible. The kingdom of God lies within you. It's right there. That's pretty darn clear. So it's again that going within, which we were talking about before we came on, meditation and some of our experiences with meditation. And there's so many different ways you could do it. But it's transformative. We really have to go within to have that type of experience. And it's all throughout the whole Western mystery tradition as well. The Kabbalah gets into that as well. Hermeticism. Everybody's really in agreement, and I've been doing a lot of talking about Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, and Taoism, how there's really so much harmony there. Sikhism too, as really all those besides Taoism come out of Hinduism. And even in Hinduism, there's, Christianity, there's 30,000 plus different types. It's kind of similar in Hinduism. There's many different ways of looking at it. But it really boils down to semantics, besides the dualist point of view and the non-dualist point of view. And that breaks down into, again, just viewing the greater whole. So if we're taking a dualistic point of view, that's what we see in the West. We see God and the devil, right? That's simple. Really, when we go in depth and you start to realize, who influenced Jewish thought, because Christianity and Islam both come out of Judaism with some influences from other sources as well, especially the Persians, really, because you don't find the prophetic aspects of the Jewish tradition so much until you have the exile, the Babylonian and Persian exile. Then, because they were absorbed into a different society for the most part and exposed to a different society for the most part, then their whole mindset starts to change, and you get that whole messianic line of thinking of looking for a savior. And, again, if we look at so much of what we have with Christianity, for instance, we could see, it comes out of Egypt and the mystery traditions. It comes out of Persia, and we could get into the three kings. And I know I'm going off in so many different directions. Where those three kings came from. They came from the East. They came from Persia and perhaps even India. And then when that gets us into, where's the missing years of Christ? Where was he? Well, there's a Saint Issa that was spoken of in India that really fits the bill of Christ very, very well. And Issa is the name for Jesus, the one we call Jesus, Yeshua, in Islam. So that's another interesting curiosity there. But basically, the dualistic point of view is that there's these two opposing forces of good and evil in a constant battle. And we see it in Zoroastrianism, which again, if you look at Mithras and Dionysus, and there's so many others, Krishna too, you could find a lot of quote-unquote Christ in those myths and legends and as well. It's a repeating thing, which gets us into archetypes as well, which is something I've been thinking about making a video on for the last week and will do. But the non-dualistic point of view is that ultimately everything is one. So like when we're looking at the yin and the yang, there are two sides, two opposing forces that create the dynamism that gives us this material world. But when we look at that circle, that whole, there's that one unity, and that's what's echoed in all these Eastern religions and philosophies, the oneness of all, which the Gnostics understood.
And I was trying to look up the Star Watchers of Persia. They had their own in Babylonia. They had their own temples dedicated, and even during let's say the sieges of the Islamic wars during the time, they were left alone for some time because they were the star watchers, the stargazers, the keepers of time itself in Persia. And I know I did a video about that about 2 years ago, and I'm trying to remember exactly what they were. They had a very specific name, and they were left alone for so many thousands of years. Watchers of the East, they had their own sect out there, and they would also go on pilgrimages and come over to what is now what we would consider in Jerusalem and over into Greece and into Rome, and they were back and forth for literally thousands of years, always left alone because they were the keepers of time. And you have to wonder, what's going to happen as these shifts are going on now in terms of belief systems as we enter these new ages here. And when I say new ages, I mean the plural, because and everything that we described earlier in the program. So what kind of shifts do you think people would expect in terms of the way they're thinking about government, themselves in relationship, and then also in religion as well, because all these energetic shifts are obviously going to shake the foundations of almost everything in society. So moving forward, what would you expect in terms of the shifting? And I can try to rephrase my question better in a minute if you can give me a second here.
Sure. I think this is what it is. The power structures are going to come down. There's no way around it. They realize it. If you are, say, Catholic, for instance, which that's what I was born into, you recognize the change going on now. They've been changing things. Some things that was totally unacceptable are becoming acceptable because our minds are changing, or the ways we look at things are changing. The shift is coming, and also, they know their time is short. What will disclosure do, for instance, to all the pomp and circumstance and, hypocrisy really that we see going on in the world, both in, the religious and in the political venues? It's inevitable. And that's why they are panicking, because we are waking up. There's been probably so few. We were talking yesterday about what percentage of the population do you think is really awake to the whole game and recognizes it's all a game. What we're seeing right now in the political arena, as we've been equating it so much to watching a WWE event. And nowadays, we all know it's fake. It's just entertainment. It's acting. But, if you went back 30 years ago, you might have 50% of the people that actually thought it was real. And it's the same thing that's going to go on now. We're going to recognize, wait a minute, you mean my vote didn't really count? Or you mean I shouldn't, why am I giving 10% to the church? When the, Vatican has more wealth than many countries. It's going to collapse these structures. And obviously, too, what's happening now, being the great unveiling of the apocalypse, is that, the dirt's coming to light big time, especially in the political arena. And I do think we're going to see a lot more coming out in the next few weeks. I do think, as we come to some key events, that we're talking about politically, and we talked about the two eclipses that we've had. We had the November 30th, and we're looking forward to December 14th. Well, by the way, the December 14th, that's when the electors vote for their states. And what's that going to look like? Because we've already had a lot of talk of electors not voting the way that the state has been called. There's a lot of key dates coming up. And it's interesting how they coincide with astrological events. You made a great statement before we came online about millionaires and billionaires. Would you share that with us?
Well, I was listening to somebody else earlier talking about some of these shifts as well. And they were saying that, millionaires, they don't follow astrology. Are you kidding me? But billionaires do. And it was kind of an apropos statement because those who are running the world at the moment with the money, with the World Economic Forum, they're all billionaires. and they're all following and riding on top of these natural cycles for the reset. They might try to sell it to the world as a reset because they care so much about humanity. They care so much about equality. Oh yeah, tell me that over the last 2,000 years that they cared so much that just this year with all the energetic changes that they really want to make a difference now because they care about you so much. That should send a huge like, wait a minute, what? But no, everybody's buying into it. Oh great, they care about us now. One for you, one for me. I can't own a house, but other people can come in and take over my property and farm the land together. Yippee! And they're buying it hook, line, and sinker. But this change of the movement is being set, so the foundation's being rebuilt by them for you right now, and they're just going to drop you in the new foundation, whether you want to or not. They're going to take you, dragging you across, kicking and screaming into the new air foundation versus what was the earth just a few weeks ago as we transition into this new. And that's really interesting. The electors, I don't know, do you think it'll really be that they're going to do it on the 15th, or do you think something else will happen and that'll throw in a whole bunch of, I would say, the mind candy into the transition through this December 21st pivotal point here? I can't believe they brainwashed everybody to really think that these elite care about you suddenly, and people are buying it. It shocks me to no end that they really believe after all this death, destruction, starvation, control, torture, and poverty that has been put on this planet for 2,000 years, that suddenly this year they care enough about us, they love us so much that they want you to change? That they're going to change their ways also? No, something's very wrong with that.
Exactly. Yeah, and you were talking, we've been using code for some words that are key, like we had talked about editing out certain things, certain words. We've been saying, V is for victory, and, people understand what we're talking about when we bring up the letter V. And it's interesting that, they're talking about the rollout at the same time. So there's another thing, December 15th. And, how long will it be before, just like V for Vendetta, the people all of a sudden wake up, rise up, and say, we don't buy this anymore. One of our family members sent us a link to Les Miserables, which I know Cindy never watched it, but think about the build up to the French Revolution. How much can you push people? How hungry do they have to be before they just won't go along with things anymore? And not that we're advocating any sort of violence. Gandhi got things done without being violent, but he did get things done. There are ways of doing things, and I think the biggest thing is just if we could find ways to step out of the system, find ways of taking their power. They control us through the monetary system. And as you were saying, you were talking about Bitcoin and, how the monetary system is going to change in the future.
Well, it makes sense if you're looking at it as a transition from a heavier medium such as Earth. Think about it like a rock or a dirt, and we're moving into air. So the difference in flow of energy of a cloud versus a rock, if I can put it in a better metaphorical sense, the energy is going to move much faster in a cloud than it would in a rock. Even if it's lava and it's at the boiling point, you're still just getting a heavy liquid to move around. Still much more dense than a cloud would be. So think about a coin, a heavy piece of metal, compared to Bitcoin, which is in the ether. It flows. It's like air in itself, the way it moves through. And you could take a look at different ways of doing this. And how about working at home? You don't have the heaviness, the denseness of the office and the hierarchy in the office of water cooler politics and all these things that you consider like a heavy, dense office space. Because, through my life, I know very few people that really love to go into their corporate office jobs. They went there because they had the obligation for a mortgage and a family to continue to support. But almost everybody I've ever talked to never liked it. That's that heavy denseness versus living at home or working from home where you can play with your children anytime you want. You can have your own free time and work at your best time. That's a very free air kind of energy again. And the sharing economy, I can't believe they took the legs out of it, because it made sense to me about, Airbnb. You don't need to have a house. You can rent somebody else's house. Uber, you don't need to have a car. You can get somebody else's car. But then they knocked the legs out of that, and now they're talking about there'll be no private land ownership or something in the future. Again, that's an air kind of concept, sharing everything, no ownership of a heavy house, but everything in amongst it is shared. So again, that's like free movement of energy. So I see this coalescing right into the Great Reset with the World Economic Forum, because that's where they're pushing everything right now. Like everything I just described to you is the same way World Economic Forum, billionaire, they're all pushing toward the same systems of the lighterness, the Bitcoin, the work from home, the decentralized whatever systems, the sharing of land. And that's exactly where we're being pushed. We're being pushed right in the same direction of all these, where we're really going anyway. And it would be completely disruptive to their old system of archaic control of the pyramid. But now they're saying, oh no, we're going to jump in front of you. We're going to push you out where we're going to set up the foundation. You're already going to arrive there. Thanks for the control again. Long answer for what I talked about Bitcoin. Sorry, sometimes I ramble.
Well, no, a lot of good points. And, one of a slight pet peeve for me that comes up is people, we know that they're shifting power to the Chinese system, but the Chinese system is not communist, not at all. I mean, it's extremely capitalistic, and in communism, communal living, the original thought, and I'm talking pre-Lenin as well. The original thought is sharing. Like if we look to a communal system, more than likely that's what Jesus, Yeshua, was in. He was in a scene. I feel pretty sure of that, and there's a lot of biblical scholars that would be in agreement that he was in a scene, and the Essenes shared everything. Nobody owned any personal property. Besides, the clothes on their back, basically, and maybe a cup and a bowl. Everything else was shared. We don't see that. There's billionaires in China. The leader of China himself, Xi, he's a billionaire. Putin, he's rich. This is not communism. Really, it's fascism. Because it's ruled through the power structure, and there's that aristocracy, that is usually in the corporate structure to control everything.
Yeah, how do you think I just can't see how everybody that's alive right now has been born into a certain energy field, if you will. And, astrology is all about that. Where your energy resides is what you're born in. That's why we have the 12 signs in the zodiac, because each one of those is specific, but then also the time you're born, because this Jupiter-Saturn conjunction is also a cycle of 20 years, just on the regular, not with the changes of anything, but every 20 years it rolls around, but this time right on that same conjunction, then it's shifting. All these shifts are happening. But people are born in a certain time and a certain frequency, if you will, but that's going to carry over into this new, air time, if you will, in the World Economic Forum reset. Like, I just don't think a lot of people are going to be ready for this shift, and especially they don't want to be pushed in. You can see, it's like a rancher trying to push all the cows into a chute, and they're like, hell no, I'm not doing that right now. There's a lot of pushback into this Great Reset as you see it. So I just don't know, with all these shifting energies, how people are going to react, and I really think maybe they got it wrong, and how quickly people are going to comply to everything that's requested. I don't know. Maybe I'm off base with that, but I really see a huge butting of the heads and systems and what's acceptability perhaps moving forward here.
Yeah, there's going to be tremendous pushback. There's people are waking up in droves and are recognizing what's going on. Yeah, was it Netherlands? Was it Denmark or Denmark? It was Denmark. Yeah, Denmark, put a law into effect about that V for Vendetta, issue that's going to be, I think, everywhere very, very soon. And the people went out there peacefully. and just were banging on pots and pans for the most part for days and days, and it worked. They rescinded it. And we saw originally with the Yellow Vest protests too. It was over like taxes at first, and that got rescinded, and other things did too. They gave concessions. We have to voice our approval. We have to say we do not consent. And, the interesting thing is that so many people have suffered during this year economically, but yet who's thriving? It's the biggest of the biggest. It's those with the most power and resources, whether we're talking Amazon or Walmart or some of these other corporations out there, or individuals like Bezos and Gates, as well as others. They're thriving. They're doing better than ever. Better than ever. It's pretty obvious.
Yeah, but it does seem it's still in that same power structure of control, and now they're using these same behemoths of business to require something of you to enter their establishments.
Mm-hmm.
Vendetta-ish. No come into our place of food purchasing. And you can see how this will move. I'm just, curious if there's enough people out there to say, no, we will not shop at your stores, to cause them to say, all right, maybe we will shift a little bit. But I don't know. Do you think people can get together enough to do that and use their resources to say, no, we will never shop here again, and get enough people to do it that it will really make a difference? Or will it, the club will go out of business and they'll go to the co, and then everything will combine into the co, and it'll be even a double giant behemoth because the one went out of business? I mean, is there really that much willpower in the people out there to be able to shift it?
Well, that is still to be seen. I know there's enough anger building for sure. And what you just said there, that's the ultimate goal. There's just going to be, basically one state-run place, one place controlled by the government, the powers that be, that you shop. There's just going to probably be one choice. One online choice and one in-person choice, and that's going to be pretty much it. And they're going to tell you, like we went to the store today, just a local store, to just get a few real basics, and everything was like, limit 2 per customer as far as all the paper products. So we're getting back into that swing, and it's going to get a lot more severe, as you know. I mean, you've done as much, if not more, than anybody out there on uncovering the food shortages that are going to be coming. But so much of it, again, it's all about control. It's all about control. Before we even got into these times, there's so many farmers being paid not to produce, to keep prices at a certain level. And then, of course, being forced to grow with GMO seeds. It's been a plan that's been, underway for a long, long time. And, I'm hopeful that as much as possible gets exposed, especially through this selection process that we find ourselves in, and looking towards what's going to happen on December 14th, and also see what happens in Inauguration Day. Let's hope that as much as possible gets exposed to, the world needs to be shocked. It needs to be shocked and say, oh my God, we cannot stand for this anymore. I think what's going to come about in the long run is we're going to go back to being in harmony with each other, in harmony with the land, living more tribally, in a state of perhaps what you would call anarchy. And if you look in, I think it's the Merriam-Webster dictionary, the last definition of anarchy, the third one, is a utopian state without powerful central control. And I'll take that any day.
Yeah, so let me ask you, Cindy, when you went in there, you were one customer, and you went in 2 people, and you were 2 customers? Did you pay separately, or did you buy everything together, or did you use that one limit per customer to your advantage of being able to, you're 2 customers? Did you do that?
No, we didn't do that. But sadly enough, what did cross my mind is I'm standing here with my husband, and I'm thinking, are they going to start making everybody do this 6 foot apart thing? Is there going to come a point where I can't stand next to my husband? Or what if we have children? How is that going to work? They have so many authoritarian rules coming up the pipes to keep people under control that it's just getting ridiculous. And I think one of the biggest changes we're going to see moving into this new sign is people are going to see through the BS. They're going to see through the companies. They're going to see through the politicians. They're going to see through everything. They're going to see that everything has been set up for us, to follow along so that we can be controlled. So that's the number one thing that I expect to see people doing.
The coincidences that we see, there was an interesting number 201, and there happened to be this event that took place, just a couple months before this whole thing rolls out, and it was eerily accurate as to what was coming. And then we look into, who was the person hosting this event, follow the money, follow the power and the control, follow, what's going to end up being given as the remedy for the problem that the event is talking about. I think people are not as blind as they think we are.
But the food could be the key ingredient that would make people jump through hoops they wouldn't otherwise jump through. If you take away a food source of somebody, they're going to do something different after a while. And that's, I think, with all these setups I just did a video a couple days back on, there's a new treaty that is coming out starting on January 1st, 2021. It takes precedent over all the other international seed and species treaties. And what the new treaty is all about is every country that's in agreement of this, and there's right now 72, but that was a couple years ago, so I'm sure there's more now, that anybody that's involved in this treaty with the seeds, anybody who finds a seed is allowed to claim it as, quote unquote, the discoverer. So let's say I'm a guy and I'm working for a company. I could just go into Africa and find like a hybrid rice that's been growing in the very certain small area of an estuary or a delta and say, I discovered it. And now all the Africans would have to buy back their own seed from their own native species that's grown there for how many thousands of years that they farmed forever. But because they didn't classify it and go through all the hoops and hurdles and tests and peer review and all these things that are required with thousands and thousands of dollars to get a seed species classified, they lose out on their own indigenous seeds. But in addition to that, every country has to allow every other country to come in and DNA gene sequence all life, animal and plant. And that would include fish, frogs, amphibians, etc. Anything that is alive, every country can come in and DNA gene sequence it, and then since there's a patent on it, then you're going to have to get a license to use it. And the way that it was described to me was called using AI and all these 5G network satellites for biosurveillance, meaning in real time, they would be able to see who's planting, who's harvesting, and how the resources of the planet were being used in a real-time fashion, and then allocate and either increase or decrease your ration cards that would be on your phone as an app. But anytime you were to use something, you would need a license or have to pay a royalty fee for anything. So, I got my acreage, and since, let's say a hickory tree would be patented under one company, if I were to ever cut a hickory tree on my own private property, I would have to get a permit and pay a fee to cut my own hickory tree on my own property because somebody else owned it. And by utilizing that resource, it would require a fee to do so. And that all goes live on that goes on 2021, January 1st. This all takes a live form. And you can already see which way they're going with the food, the control of the food, control of the resources. But I'm hoping that people will really see through it and say, a corporation, I have my own land, I'm not paying you, and we're going to grow our own seed. Oh, and I might add the one last thing, which I found the most appalling and atrocious out of all of it, was subsistence farmers who generally grow their own crops and then save, let's say, 25% of that seed to then plant next year's crop. That's illegal now. from the beginning of January 1, that will be illegal across the planet to do such a thing. You will not be able to give those seeds that you saved as a gift away to anybody. And what they were talking about, in specifically Africa, was they're going to have people living in the villages that are going to be paid by companies to keep an overwatch of anybody that's saving seed and then replanting it. And if you're found to be replanting it, they're going to come and till up your field after you've planted it. They're going to be forced, and all of us really are going to be forced to rebuying seed every year, even though it's non-GMO heirloom seed that's from the regional area, that's been there as an indigenous plant. Somebody's already patented it as quote unquote the discoverer. So the local people are not even going to be able to grow their own local crops again without buying new seed every year, even though it can save it and replant it. And that's sickening. But that's where we're going in this new air, sharing everything. Well, I don't know about patenting all species and all animal and all plant life on planet Earth. To get a permit for it is really air. That seems like more depth of control for me, but maybe I have a different thought about it.
Well, yeah, that's absolutely disgusting, and
it is.
We that's something that really can't be allowed. That's where the people have to just, you have to share this stuff. In which you are, in which we are, and everybody out there, please do share. Share your knowledge and what's happening. Let people know and wake up. It's just crazy. It's absolute craziness to think about something like that going into effect, but that's where we're at. Really, there is one thing. If we could somehow do this one thing, I think it would take all their power away. But I don't know how that could be passed through. I mean, if people rose up and said, eliminate the whole concept of corporations, because it's through the corporations that they control everything and consolidate their power. That would just hamstring them totally. And, they'd have to, I don't know what they would do if they didn't have their corporations to control everything. And what if instead of these big conglomerates, we went the other way and made it so it's only legal to have a sole proprietorship or a partnership with just one other entity and not these corporations, because the corporations are, the way that they are wielding their power.
Cindy, do you have any thought on that?
Well, yes, I do. I was sitting here thinking there's so many more of us than there are of them. And, I've heard this term called a totalitarian tiptoe, where they put all these rules out there and regulations, and then they kind of test and see if people are actually going to abide by it or not. And if they do push back hard enough, they'll kind of take a few steps back, but then test the waters again a little bit later. And I feel maybe they're realizing that people are going to wake up enough with this new conjunction that they're not. I feel they need to put their laws in place now. It's kind of a now or never thing, because they're not going to be able to really push much harder past this conjunction. That's what I feel, and actually that's also my hope. And I do believe people can do it.
Yeah, I believe also as we're at the last race for the time period to push everything in order here, because we're coming to such a shift in energies with the grand solar minimum. Also, 2024 is an integral date, another, huge, gigantically unbelievable benchmark to look for in terms of planetary conjunctions and the way the planets are lining up in the perfect square out with all the gas giants. Again, here we go, Jupiter and Saturn involved once again in a huge magnetic pull on our planet. I think it may be a global liquefaction event or some sort of mud flood induced type of thing, and a lot of rupturing in pipes and a lot of rupturing in bridges, etc., volcanic eruptions and earthquakes right at that time as well, about 3.5 years from now, coming into 2021. But look at the last push there's been, this massive push, and we wouldn't do it, so now it's being forced. It's such ridiculousness. And I'm wondering with all these these face coverings too, if that's a thing to deprive of oxygen, so we're not thinking rationally, thinking clearly as well. And every little tiny 1% of decreasing the ability of you to observe or interact with the unified field around you is just one more way of control. Because if you can't breathe properly, you're not eating properly, you're not getting energetic healthiness, if you will, then how many ways can you, that becomes an unhealthy being at that point. And I see it everywhere, and they're so entrenched in these timelines to roll this out so quickly. So yes, and I really believe that they're at their last hurrah. This is the last stand before we shift into an energetic light era where we won't see them again for 12,000 years or something like this.
Yeah, definitely. And another thing that I picked up when I was channeling about this plague upon the land, that's what we have to call it right now because of the censorship. But I picked up that it does have something to do with the ether around you and having the masks be on your face. It does interrupt the ether around you, and it does interrupt human evolution. So they've planned this out quite well.
Well, we can be the watchers out there and on the right side of humanity, if you will. But again, if the universe is looking, is there really a dark and a light? Is there really a good and evil? Or is that just a duality we put across it? Or is it just, it is? You know, I'd rather be on the side of what I consider light vibration. That's my own 2 cents worth, though. And maybe I answered my own question, because I do believe there's a light and a dark.
Yeah, there is. There is. You know, we see it. It's in this world. Ultimately, even those controllers will have to come to the light eventually at some point in time. Even though that seems unbelievable, yeah, certainly maybe not in this lifetime. Maybe it'll be thousands or tens of thousands of lifetimes.
Well, and also you got
one's been.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Cindy. Sorry.
I was just saying, you know, also a lot of times the light, you know, it's very intelligent. It can take things that are perceived as darkness and use that darkness to actually end up back at the light. So ultimately, everything, yes, is one. This is a very important path we all get to take, and it's a wonderful opportunity, a wonderful time. It's great to be alive right now, even though it's a little bit scary. It's a great time to be alive and witness all these changes.
Yeah, I can't think of another time that there'd been so much change in a human lifetime. You know, obviously World War II would have been another one because that was a huge effect there. And again, it was about 5 years of this massive change from the old world into the new world. Electricity, perhaps, but I really can't think that much of change in a human lifetime that would have been seen, because as soon as you're dropping back in the 1800s, I mean, there wasn't that much change. Yeah, sure, the steam engine, different systems of governance, maybe a palace went up here or there, maybe the palaces were re-inhabited after they'd already been there from a previous, more intelligent, different society, and they just re-inhabited what they found after another cataclysm or destruction. But there were, you know, the thing about this much change happening in a very short amount of time, there's really no other period in history that it occurred this fast.
Yeah, this has been just dizzying. The change, and you know, I'm hearing that from so many people in their comments and just friends, you know, family members, that they knew, so many people knew this was coming, but they're just being stunned by just how fast everything is coming and rolling out.
Yeah, I thought it was going to take until 2022 or 23 for this to actually fully manifest, because I kept saying they would lock the planet down. Now, see, my volition was coming from a grand solar minimum standpoint, that once you understood, or once the general populace understood what a grand solar minimum meant about cooler conditions in some times of the year that would then decrease crop yields, that people with their money would pack up, cash out of the markets, grab their money, and then go to a warmer place where there was more stable growing conditions year-round, which would be 20 degrees north latitude to the equator, or from the equator to 20 degrees south latitude. And people would just start to bunch up around that equatorial band. And I was saying there's no way the elite are going to let you do that. The system would get disrupted economically before the true chaos came with food shortages. And I know for sure an enormous amount of power brokers have been setting up these areas around the equator as their own private gardens. I know one area in Indonesia, if you know Java and Bali and Lombok, if you go south of there, there's another island called Sumba. Now, there's about 100 square miles on that island that have been set up as a no-go grow zone on there. They set up almost every species that grows in the world as a literal new Garden of Eden. And check it out. It's on Sumba, S-U-M-B-A. And it's funny that Sumba was the lion that took over inside that the film from Disney, but then we have the same island that's now been set up as sort of a Garden of Eden, Noah's Ark habitat thing over there. So I was like, all right, they're never going to let everybody just run away and go to all these places. They're going to crash everything and what I consider lock the planet down. I thought it would take a few more years in total lockdown. It would take like a couple, 2-3 years for it to manifest. And what I meant by the lockdown, I couldn't really describe other than they weren't going to let you travel, they wouldn't let you take your money. But now we see how this happening and how fast it happened. 9 months. I was thinking 3 years, and in kind of a slightly different way that they would crash the economy, not do this thing with the vendetta.
Yeah, we're definitely seeing that. And, it's interesting, too. Like so many places we've talked about that the land is owned by the queen, so to speak. Like when we're looking at Canada, which we know it's going to just probably get colder and colder unless we have a crustal displacement event and all of a sudden it finds itself more equatorial. But
that would be game over for almost everybody. Oh, man.
Yeah, and we don't know what's going to happen really as far as all that goes. But, look at Australia, look at New Zealand. It's over 90% of the land is owned by the government, which ultimately in those countries it all is basically controlled by the crown. It's pretty crazy to think that we allow it in these days. And when I'm looking at different states too, like why is it so expensive in some of the states out west? Well, Nevada, for instance, 86% owned by the government. California, actually, almost 50% of it is owned by the government, and that includes BLM and, forests and things along those lines. But there's a method to the madness, that they've planned out so far ahead. So far ahead. It's people just aren't aware of how long this has been planned and laid out. And now everything is rolling out like dominoes. The dominoes are falling very, very fast right now.
They are. And, I think we need to move into this with the understanding that this is not their first rodeo. They have done this over and over and over and time again. And I think what we do when we make our videos here and we teach people how to go within or how to find their center is going to be very helpful moving forward, because there might be a whole barrage of laws and lockdowns come down on people, and people may actually lose their minds, when they realize, oh boy, this has happened. What am I going to do? Externally, people are used to looking externally for comfort or for something, for anything. But really, right now, is the best thing to do is to learn to go within and find that peace.
You said something interesting there. They've done this time and time again. What type of cycle duration are you talking about, or do you think intuitively how? Is it a 400-year cycle that they're already continuing to be in power? Because I'm just curious. I have my own ideas of something. Seems that our history is very, 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 very short. What they're telling us at a couple 400,000 years versus what I'm thinking about 21 million years. There's a quite a bit difference. But what kind of cycle duration are you talking about where it comes to this, where the Great Reset's here, there's nothing they can do energetically about it, and they've done this again and again? You have a time period on that?
Intuitively, I want to pull up 400 years, because when you look at families and information being handed down from one family to another, that information over time, of course, gets lost. So I feel they can do it from anywhere right around 400 years. They can get away with it.
When Cindy was channeling Laurel, who's a Pleiadian contact, it was interesting because what she said they have done is, we've heard of the Hopi saying that we're going into the fifth world. Well, she said that they've done this thousands of times to humanity. Thousands of times to humanity. Not like 4 or 5 times, thousands. And that's kind of mind-blowing. And, when we start digging up all these strange monoliths and, interesting artifacts all over, you really got to wonder, how often have we gone through this? When you look at population, I was bringing this up on one video, it doesn't make sense. The population growth just doesn't make sense. I think we had 1.5 billion people supposedly in 1900, and now we have 7.7 billion. That's really quick to think that our, it's going back just to the reset of the Younger Dryas period, for instance. If most people were wiped out in that event 12,000 years ago, that mathematical progression doesn't seem to make sense. It seems like there must have been a bigger reset, way before that.
Yeah, I could point to one, the 8.2K event. Everybody's understood about the Younger Dryas. Apparently, 10,000 mating pairs of humans were left. That was it, 10,000 pairs of humans to mate again. But then, they truck along for another 4,000 years. The population starts to swell up again. They're getting into the tens or hundreds of millions, at 100 million, something like this, and a whap. 8.2K event where the temperature drops something like 16 degrees Celsius in a matter of less than 10 years. And that plunged everything back into 1,000 years of, hey, everybody squeezed right along the equator again. And then it warmed up again, and then they came out. And then we've had a couple setbacks since that. 25% of the population was wiped out during the Maunder Minimum. And that was only 400 years ago. So you have to think about that, put it in context for a second. There's been way deeper, way crazier. The late antique little ice age wiped out 25% of the global population, possibly more. That was in 535, and they even talk about it in the Roman accounts, how the air was poisoned. And but even the Chinese talked about that, how the air was poisoned. So obviously it was a global event. And how many times does the population get knocked down? 20, 30% of the global population gets wiped out. And here we are. Yeah, something doesn't sit right with the amount of populace. They can say it's oil. Yeah, great. And we had different engines and oil and medicines. And okay, it sounds believable, but what's with the wipeouts and the resets that nobody really talks about?
Well, you and I have talked.
And what happened during those times too? Excuse me for a second. It's not just that 25% of the people died. I mean, there was a mass cataclysm that happened during that time that is never talked about, and it seems to be a cyclical thing as well.
Yeah, we've talked about this in some other conversations. The ultimate thing that pops out is that humans aren't in control. We're not in control of this planet. That's the bottom line. And so the ones that are in control look at us as a resource, and go back to the Sumerian tablets, where Enlil says there's too many of them, time to get rid of them, so send a flood. There's a lot of evidence to that, and we've gotten in channeling that we haven't shared, that when we are done with the human control system that we perceive on this planet, then there might be more of a direct face-to-face confronting the real controllers.
Cindy, I'd like to hear your thought rolling up on behind that freight train and with the information here.
Well, it's just, it gets really convoluted, it gets complicated, and I just see that there's going to be more of a face-to-face coming when it comes to the controllers and human beings. I can't explain it. It's just something I see happening.
And it explains to me what I've gotten over the years, because I've seen different events over the years, including, WW3, a Red Dawn scenario in the U.S., but then also, and it was interesting because I did report on some of the declassified UFO stuff that's come out, and there was a Navy official that even came out and made the statement that, there could be vast number of basically UFOs, even cities under the oceans, and we wouldn't even know about it. Mm-hmm. Underwater submersible objects that we don't know of different origin. And I had a vision of that years ago, like 25, 30 years ago. I saw like more ships than you could count coming out of the ocean and also in the air. And as I've also came to the realization when I was about 23 years old, that the day of the Lord really looks like a UFO, an alien invasion, is what it looks like. So what Cindy saw was that when the people finally wake up and overthrow the system, then there is the real possibility that we will see the actual controllers for, who they are, and some of them are interdimensional, really residing on the fourth or even the fifth density, but they do have minions that are very 3D, and they will use those minions, perhaps. But the other flip side to that card is then the ones that have been holding back from helping us because of free will would perhaps intervene as well, and then we get back into the Vedic legends of the wars of the gods going on over our very heads.
And I think one thing people are going to start realizing with this conjunction coming up is they're going to realize, well, they're not alone. Like dimensionally, there's so much going on around them that they could ever dream of. There's, entities, there's portals, there's so many different things going on. And, people who are extremely empathic, they're going to realize, oh, wow, all these feelings I've been having, they're probably not mine. I probably ran into somebody's energy field who was quite cranky, and now I'm cranky. And a lot of these things are going to be coming to light. And I'm kind of excited for that.
Yeah, because if you saw that coming from the skies and you really, seen what the Vedics are written about, I mean, we would carve that in stone as well so nobody would ever forget. And, these portals opening in the forest and more nature lands, maybe that's why there's more sightings of things now, because energies are just shifting where things that were sort of invisible are now more visible. Not really sure, but it's definitely a shift in occurring right now. And, everybody feels something right now. There's nobody I can talk to that is not feeling something is, I wouldn't say amiss, but I would say not as it was, and it's a hard to define state of movement into something. I'm not going to say forward because that's the wrong way to look at it. It's just a shift in movement or a shift in life itself, and everybody's feeling it. And I know there's the whole, this reset thing going on, but it's way deeper than that. It's something well into the energetic levels of change that they're cluing into, and it did. The fear base is I lost my money, I lost my job, whatever. But on top of that, on a whole different energetic level, everybody's feeling something too. I think it's just the sign of the times. It is the time. I'm excited for this 21st to come rolling around. I'm very excited. I'm trying to center myself. I'm going back to the forest tomorrow to look around and really take some good images out there and really meditate off and, make some offerings out for the forest and whatnot. I really want to get my mind set in these next few days. I'm going to spend as much time as I can out in nature. I think I might even go just live in the forest for a minute until the 21st comes, and the best I can.
Yeah, it's very grounding, and that's why we always try to get out there for at least a couple hours a day, and just go for a hike and then just sit in a nice spot and just absorb the energies, meditate, do mantras. It is exactly what's needed. We really do. We need to reconnect to the earth and, kindle all those good energies, because we're so bombarded by all this, the negative stuff. And, humanity will be freed. We will be freed one way or another. It's coming, but we definitely have a roller coaster ride ahead.
Indeed, and I hope everybody out listening, really might get a better understanding why they're feeling the way they're feeling, instead of just feeling frustrated and just, almost pulling your hair out. Although I can't do that, but a lot of people would feel that they want to pull their hair out and whatever. But oh, anybody that knows why they're laughing, I shaved my head, so you can't see me because it's an audio podcast.
But yeah, ultimately too, I mean, the thing to take from this is, like, Jesus, Yeshua said, I and the Father are one. And he didn't say that, but you're not.
Right.
So, and again, when we look into the other side, the different traditions out in the East, and the Gnostics, Kabbalah, the Western mystery tradition, Hermeticism, we've done this before. This is basically a school for the soul, so to speak. And so, it's up to us to rise above and to react in the best possible way we can for the unity of this planet and everything on it.
I think that's one of the most important things, is to understand that your reaction is your responsibility, and depending upon your reaction, things may come to you or they may be repelled. So it's very important to get in touch with yourself, find your center, find your peace.
Yeah, no, things are changing too, and you might have to make split-second decisions that you never thought you would have to make in your life, but that's a real part of reality moving forward as well.
Yes, most definitely. It's going to get pretty intense. So, there's that need again to remain grounded, nature, meditation, exercise, and again, keep your body strong too as well. And try to avoid all the toxins that they're always trying to feed us.
Mm-hmm.
That's such a good message. All right, well, I'm going to say thank you for having me on tonight. Appreciate your mind expanding my mind as well.
Oh, it was our pleasure. And actually, I came up with so many things that I wanted to ask you that we'll have to do in a future episode, especially about, your thoughts on timelines with the grand solar minimum and all the actual changes that's going on the planet. There's still so much more to cover, but we could always do that in the future, and I always enjoy having our conversations.
It's always wonderful.
Yes, and for anybody out there listening, please put some comments in the description box below of what you would like us to talk more about. My being so grand solar minimum centric and the energy changes with that overlapping into all these other esoteric changes and other cycles within cycles. I like talking about that. So if there's anything out there that you think I didn't cover or we didn't cover as a conversational topic, please leave it in the description box below. I'd love to read the comments. And again, Michael, what you had for a list, maybe we can add to it for another discussion. And Cindy, I cut you off. Please continue.
No, it's okay. Totally fine.
So it was awesome. This was a great conversation. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, David. Anybody that hasn't subscribed yet to David at Adapt 2030, please do. He's a treasure trove of information.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
So as always, guys.
I'm a walking ruby. Thank you. I'll go back to my treasure box now, to the pirate treasure box. There I go.
Thank you so much, David, and everybody out there. Thank you guys so much for being part of this family. As always, God bless and namaste.
Namaste.